such an example where bhakti has become the lifeblood. Bhakti is in the beginning, at the end, and in the middle and at the end. Then Narada did not mention his name. We know that Narada was a great, great devotee, but he did not mention his own name. He says, Yatha Braja Gopikana, as in the case of the gopis in Vrindavan. So see the humility. And he mentions the names of gopis because gopis practiced dualistic devotion, but they finally become one with Krishna consciousness. This word has become a little bit dubious now, but they become one with Sri Krishna. At one place, Sri Chaitanya says that Naso Ramana Naham Ramani Duhu Manobhava Pesala Jani. Sri Ramakrishna also used to say that I swear in the name of Mother that there is nothing but Mother in me. So the devotee and the Lord becomes one. That is why Naradiya Bhakti, as Sri Ramakrishna has said, is that path of devotion which is prescribed for Kali Yuga. Then the third point Swamiji wants to highlight is what is the difference between devotion and emotion. Actually, in our scriptures they use this word kama and it is contrasted with the word prema. And again, Chaitanya Dev has made a differentiation between these two words. Kama means what we do for our selfish purpose, to gratify our own desires. This is called kama. And prema is a spontaneous love going out from us. And Chaitanya Dev has said that it is devotion to the Lord. When we are happy with the happiness of Krishna, we want to satisfy the desire of Krishna, and that is called prema. These are 3 points which I want to highlight from the introductory part of Swamiji's lecture. First is that Bhakti Yoga is not theoretical, it should be practiced as a practical means to realize a goal. Second, the quotation from Narada to explain what bhakti is intense love for God. And third is the differentiation between bhakti and just utter emotionalism. And then next he cautions, and it will be nice to read out what he has said because they are so important. He says the singleness of attachment, nishtha, to a beloved object, without which no genuine love can grow, is very often also the cause of the denunciation of everything else. All the weak and undeveloped minds in every religion or country have only one way of loving their own ideal. That is by hating every other ideal. So that is the thing which we are experiencing in this world. And Swamiji warns against that. And at last a very beautiful sentence comes. He says, this kind of love is somewhat like the canine instinct of guarding the master's property from intrusion. Only the instinct of the dog is better than the reason of man. For the dog never mistakes its master for an enemy in whatever dress he may come before it. So that is the nice observation he has made, and we should be very careful about that. Bhakti is intense devotion to our own ideal, but that does not mean that we should be hateful about others' ideals. That is the problem. Everyone has the right to say that his or her product is the best. But when we say that others' products are worst, then that creates a division. So the Swamiji wants us to be well guarded against this. Then the second point he discusses is the idea of Ishvara. What is Ishvara? Actually, Ishvara is a generic name. It is a common name for three powers. Swamiji quotes from the Brahma Sutras that Ishvara is he, Janmadi Asya Yataha, from where this creation, then sustenance and dissolution happens, in which. So that is what is called Ishvara, but this is in its personal aspect. So we have three things to look at. One is God, the universe, and we, the individual beings. And there are three approaches. One is that God is eternally separate from all other two, the universe and the individuals. Second is Ramanuja's approach, that three in one, all these three are in one body, three in one. And third one is non-dual Vedanta, no two. Non-dual Vedanta does not say that all are one, but it says that there is nothing but one. That is why it is called non-dual. And Swamiji gives a beautiful example, and that gives a lot of scope for us to think on this. That he says, Prahlada forgot himself when he got this unitary experience. He realized the Lord and he felt that he has become one with the Lord. But Swamiji makes this beautiful comment that, but as soon as he remembered himself, all differentiations came back. But he had a different vision of the all already. Because of his unitary experience, he was looking at this world from a different perspective. And that is the state of Vijnani, as Ramakrishna used to call it. Now, the other day I was observing a video. It is a TED talk given by Anita Murjani. Perhaps many of you have already seen that. She speaks of out-of-body experience, of her out-of-body experience. She was suffering from terminal cancer and she passed out into coma. And then she could see her own body. She could see her husband holding her hand. And she could even see her brother rushing to the airport to get a flight to come to see her. This incident happened in Hong Kong, and her brother was coming from Delhi. So she could see that her brother was sitting in the plane, and she could see her dead father and friend also. So she has explained that that was an experience where the boundaries have lost their meanings, and she has become one with a huge awareness. That was her experience, but then she understood that she had to come back to the body. She came back. Swamiji, so many years ago, he has said that when Prahlada remembered himself, all the differentiations came, but Prahlada would never be deluded by these differentiations because he had the experience, unitary experience after that, before that. And Swamiji makes a very important comment that Ishvara is the highest possible reading of the Absolute by the human mind. This is the idea actually. And Ishvara is the personalized Brahman. If we depersonalize him, then it becomes an abstract principle, the reality. And it is called Brahman and it has no gender. Brahman is neuter gender. So that was the next chapter, and the next chapter is spiritual realization, the aim of Bhakti Yoga. Now Swamiji raises a small point here, but that is very important. That, well, why should we know all the details, theoretical details about Ishvara, about the universe, about the jivas? Actually speaking, once I asked Swami Bhutesanandaji, one of our very great senior members of the order, and what is the necessity of studying scriptures? Then he just put it in a very short sentence that it is necessary to purify your mind. Afterwards, slowly I came to know that when we study scriptures, it helps us to eliminate many of invalid possibilities. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are doing a research and you have chosen some topic. You want to do research on this. Now what you do, you first Google it to see if some others have taken up this subject already, this topic already. If some others have already said that these are invalid possibilities, that if you go with this research, at the end you will not be successful because it is impossible. So any problem will propose many solutions, many varieties of solutions, but we don't know which one is actually true. Therefore, someone is inviting. I don't know what to do now. That should be from your side, I think. Okay. So there will be many possibilities which will be presented to us. But when we study the scriptures, we know how they eliminated many of those possibilities to be invalid already. Therefore, we will not be running about in the wilderness searching for the right possibility. That is the idea of studying the scriptures. They have already tested on different varieties of methods, and they have said that these methods are invalid. Therefore, do not spoil or spend your time uselessly running after these methods. This is a modern trend nowadays, that when some people come, they would ask us, suppose we take up this way, suppose this is a way to arrive at the conclusion. What do you have to say? And every time I have seen that there is an idea of contradicting whatever is said in the scriptures. That means we want to try with newer possibilities. But if you read the scriptures, you will know those possibilities have already been eliminated as invalid. This is a great thing. That is why when many people come and ask different types of questions, we know the answer already because they have been dealt with by the commentators, by the scriptures. And they have said these are invalid because of these reasons. That is a very important point Swamiji touches here. So the scriptures are like Google. Just you Google it and then you know. So that is how, that is one thing. And so this is one idea, that we have to eliminate these possibilities. So that is how we need to read the scriptures. Though we will be doing sadhana, we will be practicing the bhakti, but it is necessary that we also read books so that we are able to remove many of our doubts. That is one point. And then next one, the idea of practicality. Swamiji touches that point also. And he says, in every mind, utility, however, is conditioned by its own peculiar wants. This is a very, very important thing. And in his lecture on practical Vedanta, Swamiji has raised this point very well. He says the idea of practicalizing an ideal is that bringing down the ideal to suit our need and its fanciful reinterpretation from time to time. Yeah, so bring down the ideal to suit our need. This is a very modern trend. Now, how is it practical? If it does not fulfill or just fulfill my wishes. And these wishes will be going on changing every time. And we will be offering new fantastic wishes of possibilities, and the ideal has to adjust itself to that. So that is one idea, bringing down the ideal to the level of the to our level, and another thing, raising the life to the level of the ideal. Therefore, we have to think how bhakti can be practicalized or put into practice, that we want to raise the level of our life to a higher ideal, to a higher standard. We will come to that afterwards also. Then he speaks of two divisions of bhakti, not division, actually two parts of bhakti. One is called Gauni Bhakti, the preparatory step, and the second one is the Para Bhakti, Raganuga Bhakti, that is the highest stage. And he speaks of the Gauni Bhakti, and I read it out, the one sentence from him so that it is very clear. It is also a significant fact that spiritual giants have been produced only in those systems of religion where there is an exuberant growth of rich mythology and ritualism. Then the need of Guru. This is also a very important topic. If we want to reach perfection, which is guaranteed anyway for everyone, we were perfect, we are divine, but we don't know that we are divine. There is a fall from that divinity. We have forgotten the divinity, or we think that we are not divine. So, if every soul is destined to reach that perfection, then what is the need of our self-effort, and what is the need of a guru there? The idea is that the help of a guru structures our approaches and also helps us to quicken that approach. And reading many books, you don't do your research. You do your research under a supervisor, under a guide. And that guide is called guru. You may not get an Einstein to guide you, but some people lesser than that will be available who will help you. How to find the guru? Actually, it is the responsibility of the student. The scriptures say that he or she has to find the guru. Someone approached Ramana Maharshi and asked, Sir, have you seen God? Then Maharshi said, my dear, I am not Ramakrishna and you are not Vivekananda. So this should happen like that. If I am studying in 10th standard, I will get a guru who will help me to study 11th standard, 12th standard, like that. But why should I go to one postdoctoral student or to one PhD guide to study my 11th standard? So I will get my guru according to my standard. And if the soul is open to that, then the guru also will be available. It is just natural. And guru is needed because we want to build up our spiritual life. So in German, there is a very beautiful word. They call it Ausbildung. Ausbildung means practical training. Someone who comes here to sweep, to clean our house, has a master's on sweeping. Can you imagine that? And some people are working under them. They are getting practical training of how to clean a house. They are called Reinigung Firma. They are teaching them practical thing about how to clean a house, and they get their bachelors under them. So it is called Ausbildung. So if we want to proceed practically, then we should need a practical trainer. And how to find a guru? That is what I have said, that if we are really open to this, if I am trying to do research on chemistry, here many people do chemistry, research on chemistry, and then I should not go to a person who has a PhD in Sanskrit grammar. No, I know who should be my guide. This is the responsibility of the student. And the qualification of the teacher also is said what is the qualification of the teacher? That is very nice. What type of teacher do we need? Now I will just tell you what type of teacher is necessary for us. The teacher, if I am a student, I am a male person. So if a man wants a teacher, then he should think that the teacher should be a woman. And if a woman wants a teacher, she should think that the teacher should be a man. And also some other qualifications of a teacher are that the teacher should be handsome, man or woman, handsome. Second is should be young. Third is should be rich. And fourth is a fellow who is pursuing his postdoctoral or doctoral research in Urbana-Champaign or somewhere like that. So, and yes, you may be laughing, but this is the truth we face. Yes, we meet people. Once our Swami Chaitananda ji was telling that someone came and told him, yeah, I like Vivekananda more than Ramakrishna. Chaitananda ji asked why. Then that person said, because Vivekananda is handsome. So Vivekananda ji is handsome, therefore she likes Vivekananda. So do we need a teacher like that? Actually, we search for such teachers. This is stupidity, and we call ourselves modern, reasonable, rational, but these are things you cannot just deny. The scriptures say that these are not qualifications of the Guru. The qualifications of the Guru are: Guru should be Shrotriya, Abhijna, Akamahata, and Brahmanishtha. Shrotriya means Guru, Swamiji has said, should know the spirit of the scripture, not the words of the scriptures. The professors, they can teach Vedanta, but they don't know the spirit of Vedanta. They will never renounce all the material attachments, but they are teaching non-dual Vedanta. They are teaching renunciation, monastic life. So this type of teacher is not necessary. Shrotriya, Swamiji says the teacher should impart the spirit of scriptures. Then Brahmanishtha. Brahmanishtha means the teacher himself should have interest in Brahman, in spiritual life. Akamahata, he is not bound by material pleasures. And Avrijinaha, free from sins or pure. The idea is the teacher should be a practicing teacher, and the teacher should impart the spirit of the scriptures. Then next one he is talking about is the mantra. Mantra is actually word. As Swamiji has said, mantra is the Nada Brahman, sound Brahman. In the beginning, according to our scriptures, Vedanta, the creation started with a sound. Sound, in modern physics you call it bang, and in our scripture we call it om. So what is the difference between bang and om? It sounds almost similar. But the idea is that in the creation, first there was causation, that there will be a creation, then first creation was time actually. If you remove time from the creation, then what remains? Nothing. The creation does not exist. Therefore, you cannot calculate time before Big Bang. So, time is the essence of this creation, and with time was created space. And space has the quality called sound. Sound is the quality of space. Akasha is space, and sound means Shabdam. Shabdam is the sound, and it is the quality of space. Omkara is the first sound. In the Bible also there is this type of idea happening. They say, in the beginning there was word, and the word was with God. So similarly, the sound was there, and it manifested itself. Therefore, when I call out someone by the name, that person responds. So this sound is an expression of the existence. How to express the existence? In sound only. And that sound if it is structured, it has a structure. Just if we say Om is the holiest of the mantras, but generally speaking, the mantras which our gurus impart, those mantras have a particular structure. We may write nice Sanskrit sentences, but they would be called compositions, sometimes verses, sometimes poems, but they would be called mantras. Gayatri is not a verse, Gayatri is a mantra. And our scriptures say, Rishayo mantra drashtaraha, natu veda kartara. Mantras are seen, means realized. Realization is like seeing. Seeing is believing, they say. We believe in everything because we see them. And similarly, mantras are experience, it is more than seeing. Experience is more than seeing. We may see that the sun is moving around the earth, but the experience will say that it is not true. When we go into the outer space, we will see that the earth is moving around the sun. So, experience is more powerful than our belief or the words. And mantras, they are experienced. Therefore, it is always safe to get a mantra from a tradition, because the tradition does not give the name of the person who is the guru. The tradition gives the name of God, and it has a particular structure. When this traditional mantra Omkara will be added where, at what place, and then the Shakti portion will be added, then the main mantra name will be added, like that. So these are not composed by anyone. These are seen. These have been realized, experienced. These are called mantras, and it is always safe to take mantras from a traditional guru, not from just gurus mushrooming out everywhere, not like that. And then Swamiji speaks of worship of substitutes or images. Yeah, images are there, as you know, to remind us of the ideal. Why do we keep the photo of Sri Ramakrishna? Because Sri Ramakrishna's photo represents a huge universal ideal. Nobody has done that. Therefore, if we keep Sri Ramakrishna, we remember him. Once someone asked Swami Abhedananda ji in New York, Swami, suppose someone comes today and asks you to marry. Suppose Sri Ramakrishna comes today and asks you to marry, what will you say? Then Abhedananda ji said, I will show him the door. Why? He is your guru, Sri Ramakrishna, your ideal. He has come and told you. Why do you show him the door? Then he said, we follow Sri Ramakrishna because of his ideal. And if he comes and asks me to compromise with that ideal, I would surely know he is not Sri Ramakrishna. That is why the ideal is connected with that particular image. That's what Swami Vivekananda showed to Maharaja of Alwar. You know that famous incident? He asked the minister of the court to bring down the photo of Maharaja, the oil painting of Maharaja, and asked the minister to spit on that. Minister could not do that because whatever it may be, this is the likeness of the Maharaja. So the photo reminds Maharaja, and Maharaja is seen there through that. Similarly, the images are substitutes. They are necessary for our guide. If we have crossed that necessity, that's okay, fine. But if we are in the primary school level, kindergarten level, then in the kindergarten level we will get all the dolls to play with. In the primary level, we will get all the books with graphics. And afterwards, we won't like those graphics. Our books will change their shape and also the layouts. So it depends on at what level we are. So when we are in the primary level, at the primary level of bhakti, we need these helps. So in our tradition, we find that initially, because we belong to the solar system, sun used to be regarded as the head of the solar system, the god, the lord of the solar system. Therefore, Gayatri also is guided towards the sun god. And then the Vedic Aryans, they used to think that the sun god, he is traveling all day long, so he needs some rest. So they offered the big trees like the mango tree, the banyan trees, people trees, for him to take rest on that. So the trees, so we started with the solar worship of sun, then started with worship of Vriksha. Then during later Vedic period, we started with worship of the sacrificial stakes. So wood cut from the tree will be put there as the stake, and we used to offer or sacrifice goats and other things, other animals. And so then this is called Yupa Puja. Then Stupa Puja, we have seen that people worship dunes like stupa in the Buddhistic tradition. Then Pratika Puja, this symbols these pratikas like Shalagram Sila, then Shivalinga, these are all pratikas, symbols. And then Pratima, Pratima is the idols. So this worship, the tradition of worship, adoring the Lord through something. Sri Ramakrishna says that nobody worships the idol, saying, "Oh idol, I am worshipping you." Everyone worships the ideal behind that idol. The ideal, the God, the Lord. So that is the idea of substitutes. And then Swamiji speaks of the preparation. The first one is purity. Purity, he talks of vegetarianism, non-vegetarianism, all these things. Then he says the purity, what we know is that if one wants to be 100% yogi and spends all his or her time doing that and that only, then that person has to follow very strict codes. Their food also matters. And if you are a yogi doing Jain yogi, your codes will be different than a Buddhist yogi, than a Hindu yogi, just like that. So there is no universal standard about this. And the scriptures say that restraints are called purity, whatever it may be. So suppose for me, this banana is allergic for me, but for you it may be a recommended food. So why do you generalize this? Even sometimes the doctors say anti-allergics can create allergy in some bodies. Therefore, it cannot be generalized as such. So, if we control the desire for food and let loose all other horrible desires, then it will make us charlatans, not spiritual practitioners. So many of the cases are like that. We are very much fastidious, sensitive about food, or very simple things. But about big things, we don't care. People go and feed the ants, but they cut the throats of human beings. So what do you say about that? Therefore, purity is necessary. Purity means he speaks of ahimsa. Actually speaking, in yoga, they say ahimsa by itself is not a virtue. Ahimsa by itself is not a virtue. It is telling you not to do something. Not to do something is not a virtue. Of course, in today's world, if you don't kill others, that itself is a big virtue. But the thing is that ahimsa by itself is not a virtue, but love is. Love is the opposite of himsa, and that is virtue. So that one should practice. If we want peace, then we should practice not ahimsa but love. Then only peace comes. Then he speaks of strength. Yes, this is what is called ananda, cheerfulness. Swamiji says in Raja Yoga also, if you have a clouded face one day, do not go out because you have no right to spread this disease among others. Yes, as he has himself said, some people think that if you want to be spiritual, you should be very serious, you should not laugh, you should not smile. People come, you just raise your hand and bless, that's all. No. The first sign of spiritual growth in any path, in any yoga, is that people will become more and more cheerful. And cheerfulness comes when you have enough strength inside. Then only one can be cheerful. Then, yes, how to love God? That is a question. And I would just tell what Sri Ramakrishna has said, because we have a very modern mind. So we want to quantify everything. How much does your mother love? Na L-O-V-V-E. So I say lo, L-O. L-O is the unit for love. So my mother loves me 10 units. And so 10 lo. My father 12 lo. Like that. So Sri Ramakrishna says, okay, if you want to quantify love, then it will be like this. There are 3 units of love, he says. One, it is the love of the rank materialist to his or her, what is that, wealth, to his or her wealth. That is one kind of love, one unit of love. Second unit of love is the love of the husband or wife for the partner. And third is the love of the mother for the child. These we understand what type of love they are. And if only these 3 units of love can be added together and guided towards God, then that is what is necessary. That is how one should love God, and that is what is called bhakti. Now, Swamiji speaks of parabhakti. He says renunciation is the test of parabhakti. One has to renounce everything. It is a very, very horrible word. If you have to renounce your research, then it's gone. The problem. So, or if you have to renounce your job, then that is another problem. So, renunciation is very dangerous thing. So, do not try to think of any kind of renunciation. There is a very beautiful story in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Maitreyi and Yajnavalkya. Between Maitreyi, the wife, and Yajnavalkya, the husband, there is a conversation. And the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen was fascinated by this story. He quotes this story in his book, The Argumentative Indian. And here he says that if you have to live a life in this world meaningfully, then your eyes should not always be on wealth or material opulence. He uses this word. But it should be on death and what happens thereafter. He himself says that one. So this, the idea of renunciation presented here in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is that Maitreyi was approached by her husband Yajnavalkya. Yajnavalkya says, I have decided to take up sannyasa, so I want to divide my property between you and Katyayani. Yajnavalkya had 2 wives. And then Katyayani asked, well, you want to divide this property between us, then where will you go? No, I want to take up sannyasa. For what are you going? Oh, I want to realize God. Then Maitreyi asked, will these property bring us God? Will they help us to realize God? Then Yajnavalkya said, no, that cannot be. With these material things, you cannot realize God. In the Bible, Christ has said, God and mammon cannot be served together. God and wealth cannot be served together. So it is like that. Yajnavalkya said, no, their wealth will not take you to God. Then Maitreyi said, then you think that this is trash. So why do you want to divide trash between us? You love us. Why do you want to give trash to us? Give us a share of that for which you are going. For which you are going. Give us a share of that. So renunciation means renunciation of something which is good for the better. Renunciation of something which is bad for the good. It is not that we are choosing something bad, but we are choosing something better. That's what we do every day. We go and try to go to a supermarket and choose many things. Choosing one means renouncing others. This is the idea. Because they are valuable, they have their values, but that is not meant for me. I don't like that. So this is the idea of renunciation. It is not saying that we have to leave everything, but we have to find out something better and go for it. And that is necessary for all growth and advancement. This is the sure criteria. If we are not able to leave this present position, then there is no movement at all. We do not reach any goal. So we have to leave our present position to reach a goal. That is the idea of renunciation. It is not something horrible. Rather, Swamiji says, for a bhakti yogi, an aspirant following the path of devotion, it becomes natural because he chooses something which is better than something which may be good or bad. And there are so many ideas also, but nice ideas. And another idea that we have to renounce the false idea that God will stop our suffering. God will never stop our suffering because suffering is a natural phenomenon. If I am living at a place where there is an active volcano, so I am sitting on boiling earth. So anytime it may erupt and the consequences will follow. Therefore, why should I put a question? These are all natural things. I am also part of this nature. So suffering is there for every one of us. But if we follow the path of God, Parabhakti says that God will give us the fortitude to face suffering boldly and thus help us not to crumble down under pressure. And we do not get depression. We do not crumble down under pressure because we know. I know a very beautiful case, a lady who has lost one of her legs. She was telling, this is natural. In this world, you will find people who have lost two legs. I have lost only one leg. And it is natural. And there are hundreds and thousands of cases. So why should I bother about this? But rather I am happy. And if you look at her face, she is always happy. And she says that I am happy because still I feel strong. Still I feel strong. So we remember that famous quotation, I don't know who has said that, that I used to complain to my parents that I had no good shoes until I saw a man who had no legs. It is like that. So the false idea that if we pray to God, then God will save us from suffering, it is not true. Rather, He will reduce our suffering. Then Swamiji speaks of the triangle of love. This is very, very important. It is his greatest contribution. He says that if we love truly, not loving God only, but anyone, and we can put it to our regular practice, if we love truly, then there should be no bargaining. Love knows no bargaining. Now, I would quote from the Gita. Sri Krishna says that there are four types of devotees who call on me, worship me. Chaturvidha bhajante mang jana sukritino arjuna arto jignasur artharthi gnani cha bharatarsava. There are four types, four ways that people approach me. Arto, those who want to get rid of suffering, some problem. Jignasu, those who want to know who I am. Artharthi, and those who want something, some money. Someone wants to get rid of Artha, some want something, Artharthi. And Gnani, who inquires into the very nature of mind. He is called Gnani. Now these are four types of devotees. Now, Artharthi wants something and therefore he or she will pray to God. Now let me make it very clear. Suppose I want to buy a house. I want, Artharthi, I want a house to get rid of the suffering of my homelessness. Now what I would do, I would earn some money and I will buy the house. When I buy the house, what happens? The money becomes the means to take me to my goal, which is the house. Money is the means and the goal is the house. Now, when I buy the house, what happens? I get rid of the means, money. I give up money and buy the house. Do I suffer from that? That I have given up money? Because I have got a house. Now what happens? The money was my means to get the house. Now if I pray to God, God give me house, then God becomes the means and house becomes the goal. And therefore one day will come when I get the house, I will get rid of God also. Because that is means like money. This is the problem. If we want to bargain, this happens. Our goal is something else, not God. Our goal is the house and God becomes the means, and I will have no problem to get rid of him, to give up God, because God becomes the means like money. So Artho or Artharthi, they want God, that God should be like a bellboy. If I press the bell, he will come and stand before me and ask, what can I do for you? Like the lamp of Aladdin. So I want this. Then the genie goes and brings that thing. So God should be something like that. No, if we have proper real love for God, then we should not look at God that way, that he should fulfill my this desire or that desire. And whatever fanciful things I will be thinking should be fulfilling those things. That is the first idea that he says, love knows no bargain. And the second idea is love knows no fear. That is everyone's experience. We did not love our parents because of out of fear, and mother does not love the child out of fear. So fear should not be the criteria for our love for God. That we are afraid of punishment, we love God to get rid of that. So these are all calculative emotion. They are not devotion. So there would be no idea of fear. And the third one, he says, love knows no rival. Love knows no rival. And that is the idea when Narada says that God should be your all in all. Intense love for God. Satu asmin parama prema rupa. Amrita swarupa cha. This love will bring us immortality. Amrita swarupa cha. Because this love itself is immortal. In the Bible it is said God is love. And Swami Vivekananda has said Sri Ramakrishna is love, Love, all capital, personified. So God is love, and that is what is the idea of bliss. Satchidananda, if we look at non-dual Vedanta, the Brahman has been said to be Satchidananda. Satchidananda, absolute existence, absolute knowledge, and or consciousness, and absolute bliss. Absolute bliss means Ananda. Ananda means this love. And here the love is absolute. When we are loving God, we are not loving something else more than God. That is the idea here. Love knows no rival. Everything, every other love should be subordinate to this love. Therefore, this love or God becomes our goal. Otherwise, he becomes the means. And we can get rid of him anytime we want, give up him anytime we want. Therefore, the last idea is very important, that love knows no rival, that God should be the highest. Every other love has their place. They are legitimate. They are not to be discarded. But they should be subservient to the main love, which is God only. So, God's love has no rival, means it is the highest. Our love towards God is the highest. We are loving everyone, but we are loving ourselves the most. Similarly, if we think ourselves as God, then we are loving God the most. So this is the idea of having no rival. It is not that God does not like somebody else to be taken care of or to be followed. No, it is that if you want God, God should be the highest absolute bliss, absolute love. These are the points I wanted to highlight. Now I leave it open for you to add something if you want, or to ask for more clarifications what I have said. So we end it here. Thank you very much for joining. You can unmute, then I can hear you.
So we can have some questions.
The condition is questions means yes.
So whoever has a question can unmute themselves and ask, and again mute themselves.
I could not follow.
So
Okay,
whoever.
I'm gonna ask one question. Let me start with Marathi. You told about love, and the opposite of love is ahimsa. So where do indifferentiation stand? You know, you're indifferent to something. Neither you feel love or neither you feel hatred. So
Yeah, the idea is I did not say that the opposite of love is ahimsa. I said the opposite of love is himsa. The opposite of himsa is love. Ahimsa is just to be indifferent. Indifference, to be indifference does not mean anything. If I do not do any himsa, this by itself is not virtue. But if I have to practice virtue, then I have to love.
Maharaj, I have a question.
Yes,
So, you gave this analogy of guru being like advisor in research, and if you see in research, like when one does a PhD, one spends time with advisor, and then like the advisor personally teaches many things to the student, and then that has also been true in the lives of Swamiji and other direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna and other great philosophers. But in many cases, the guru disciples the relationship is like the mantra is given, and many times the disciple may not even get to meet the guru again. In such a situation, what is the importance of guru? Typically, when we read the importance of guru, um, like we see, like even Swamiji says that spirituality needs to be transmitted. But in modern days, in many cases, the only physical interaction is just that moment. So what is the importance of guru in this context?
yes, there are many practical problems. You see, so guru passes away. This is natural phenomenon. You cannot just deny this. Sometimes guru is not available. Sometimes the students are not available. They are living in USA, so guru in India. They don't find time even for parents also. So how the guru will help? So nowadays they have developed this internet guru. They have this idea of Google Hangout and chats that can help. If the world is becoming more and more scientific, then the gurus also will be more and more scientific. They will learn how to handle the hangouts, etc. Then it will be nice. And it is going to happen like that because the number has grown so much, and we have opted to move out and go to Champaign or go to New Jersey. So the problem is that Guru cannot just move about with the teacher, with the student. So now what is the solution to this problem? You have to tell. Yeah, this is really a practical problem, yes. But thing is that we should, if we really want help, we should try to find out ways how to get help. And that is what I said. It is always good to go through a tradition. Then you get the following gurus also to help. It is not that the person who has given you mantra is the only guru. With that, the tradition has ended. So you have got others also following the footsteps of those gurus, and the newer gurus will be able to help.
Maharaj, I have one more question. Can you elaborate on the point you made at the very beginning about the difference between bhakti and emotionalism or sentimentalism? So you said usually in sentimentalism there will be a selfish end and bhakti is supposed to be selfless. But thinking of it from a different standpoint, like when you talked about renunciation, usually even with bhakti one renounces everything, one becomes selfless, so to say, because one finds a higher joy, a spiritual joy in bhakti. So at some level that is also selfish, right? So like in a practical day-to-day setting, is there any rule of thumb to kind of differentiate between bhakti and just sentimentalism?
You have given the answer. First answer is that selfishness is the only criteria by which you can differentiate. Number one. Number two, yeah, if you follow the pursuit of your own bliss or own love or own joy, that becomes something selfish. The problem is that Swami Vivekananda came to Sri Ramakrishna, and when they were talking, Sri Ramakrishna said that there is a bowl of nectar and you have become a fly, and how would you drink of it? And Swami Vivekananda, like the modern mind, he said, yeah, I would just sit on the brim and with a stretched neck, I will drink of it. Then Sri Ramakrishna asked, why don't you plunge into it? He said, no, if I plunge into it, I will die. Then Sri Ramakrishna laughed and I said that this is a bowl of nectar. If you fall into it, you do not die, you become immortal. So the thing is that when we know our bliss, when we know God, then we will see God in everyone else, then we will share that joy with others. Not only that, we become more considerate, and then we become more selfless because we find ourselves in all, which generally we cannot do. Our training of serving people should go together with our training in spiritual life. Otherwise, only serving people will make us just dry practitioners. We will not be able to link our heart to this. Therefore, we take it up as a spiritual sadhana when we serve others. At the same time, we lead our spiritual life also separately, so that they go hand in hand. First I realize God, then I will see God in others. This does not happen. The more I realize God, the more I realize Him in me and in others also. The more He manifests in and through me and through others also. They are simultaneous. These two things happen simultaneously. But they should go hand in hand. Yes. Counter question?
Whereas then I think that answers that question. I have one last question. So about importance of reading scriptures, you talked about eliminating invalid possibilities. Can you give an example to make it concrete, like example of an invalid possibility that is eliminated by scripture?
Yes, I was just talking about Sri Ramakrishna says that if you want to get water in a well, then you go on digging at one place. And now someone objected to that, not objected, said, no, suppose I get an information that there is a well already dug up at some place. And then if I get that information, and then I will go there, why should I bother to dig a well at all? So this is a tricky question. I said that we are talking about a person who wants to practice, not a person who depends on God's grace. That also has been dealt with in the scripture. And this person, he is not aware of these different answers, and he was not aware that they have been already dealt with by the scriptures. But this is one valid possibility, but some invalid possibilities also may be there. That if I try like this without sticking to one, I may get different good ideas from different people. And I said, yeah, that is true. but that does not help you to develop in your own path. You can collect things from everywhere that you can put in your storeroom. That does not help you to grow yourself. These are like that. So many impossible questions coming.
Thank you, Maharaj.
So all quiet on the Western Front.
Maharaj, you talked about studying scriptures. What are some of the scriptures you first studied before others? Like, I'm sure now you've studied some of more Advaita scriptures, but when you first started, Maharaj, what scriptures did you start with?
You are asking this personal question to me? Directly attacking the attacker. No, this is if you want to go methodically, then there is a structure. There is a structure how one should go methodically about things. But if you just want to study something, just lay your hand on some book, which is very simple. Now I will tell you one incident in the life of one of our Swamis. The Pujari of Udbodhan fell sick, and therefore Belur Math sent another Swami from Belur Math to do puja in Udbodhan. Holy Mother was living there at that time. And this new Swami has come and he was doing puja. And you know Golap Ma, she always found interest in teasing others. And then she asked, hello dear, so you have come here, you are doing puja nicely, nice. Do you enjoy your stay in Udbodhan more than Belur Math? Now see, this is a very, very difficult question. In Belur Math that time many others, senior Swamis, Mahapurush Maharaj and others, they were living, and here of course Holy Mother is there. So this Swami was put in a big problem. Then the Swami was a little bit outspoken. Then he said, yeah, I like this place because Mother is there. But I like Belur Math also because there is some scriptural studies going on, so I can attend scriptural classes. Then there was quiet because Golap Ma was just waiting for Mother to take over. And then Mother said, yeah, my dear son, that is nice. But what do you learn from scriptures? Rather, it is better to study the lives. See how Master has written the life of Thakur. Saradananda, Sarat has written the life of Thakur. And every day I get it read out to me at night, and it is so nice. I see that as if he is speaking. So study the lives, that will help you. So that way, if we do not know how to start, we do not have a guide to help us in that way, then just pick up any book which is a life of great saints, great sages, Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Swamiji, and then we get more and more inspiration and conviction from the lives than from scriptures. Scriptures help us to reduce our numerous doubts, that's true, but lives make us more convinced. Two of German friends here, two of German people, one is very aged, another is of my age. Two of them, one of them caught hold of the book, They Lived with God, and he started reading and could not stop. Then he offered to translate that book into German, because the lives have been depicted there, and he found it is so encouraging and so much convincing and so much comforting that yeah, this is practically possible. So many people have done it, could do it. Similarly, another gentleman, God lived with them, they lived with God. These two books, two people are now translating. They are very much fascinated with these lives, not with just philosophical deliberations. So if you get the lives at hand, just start, or you try to find out someone who will be able to help you to study the scriptures methodically.
But Maharaj, you said that there is a method of studying the scriptures. To start with basic, then it moves on. So, can you talk about that method, Maharaj?
Method means if you want to study Vedanta, then there is a method you study with the preliminary book. And the preliminary books, as you know, cannot clarify things very well. So when the teacher is teaching the preliminary books, the chapters, the teacher will draw your attention to those portions where they would say, it is said like this now for your understanding for a beginner, but afterwards it may be contradictory, may seem contradictory to you, but this is for you, for this, at this stage it's all right. Similarly, the light moves in a straight line, but again you will find the light is in the form of a wave. So, but that for the child it is okay. We will use pinhole camera to see that the light comes straight. So it is like that. Preliminary books will be there. So Vedanta Sara is the first book, or Tattva Bodha. Any one of these two books can be studied, and the teacher should be able to point out the special features in this, which may be a little bit different afterwards. Similarly, if you want to study Nyaya, then you have to start with Tarka Sangraha. If you want to study Bhakti Yoga, then you have to study with Narada Bhakti Sutras, like that. Okay, is it all right now? Or do you have many more difficult questions?
Okay. Yeah. So, Maharaj, so next week we'll be starting reading Raja Yoga here. So, we were wondering if it will be possible to have your session maybe once a month or something like that, so that you can track our progress.
Yeah, that will be nice. Yeah, I would just give you a suggestion. Yeah, I will be happy to join sometime in between when I get time. Next week itself, I have a class in Berlin City. So Sunday, Saturday, I don't know if I have anything. So like that, I will find out sometime, and well, slowly I think things are settling down. So I will find out more time and to study together. When you are studying the Yoga Sutra, I will tell you, first take the first sutra itself very seriously, for which you won't get many commentaries or big commentaries, just 2 or 3 lines. But if someone is there to help you to see through all those, that Atha Yoga Anushasanam. So yoga, this word, I will just give you one very, very important idea, that the commentators did not say, even Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra did not say yoga means a connection. A connection is a matter of non-dual Vedanta, where Atman becomes one with Brahman. Identity is the goal of non-dual Vedanta, not Yoga Sutras. Therefore, yoga in Yoga Sutra does not mean a connection. It rather means a terrible thing which is called disconnection. Yoga etymologically means connection. And according to non-dual Vedanta, it means a connection between Atman and Brahman, unity. Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi. But according to Yoga Sutra, yoga means a disconnection. Atha Yoga Anusasanam. Yoga means we are going to teach you what is called disconnection. So in the second chapter, this has been very much clarified in the Yoga Sutra itself, that a disconnection is called abhava. Samyoga abhava is called yoga. And in the Gita, Sri Krishna says, Tang vidya dukkha samyoga viyogam yoga sangitam. Viyoga is called yoga. Dukkha samyoga viyoga. Our connection with this suffering, with this material world, is called dukkha samyoga. A viyoga, a disconnection from this, is called yoga. Sri Krishna himself says, Tang vidya dukkha samyoga viyogam yoga sangitam. That is the definition of yoga. So, these are very critical things. Sometimes it is difficult for people to highlight these things, but initially itself, if you know these things, then afterwards it will be easy to connect everything to this idea.
Okay.
Okay, then thank you very much.
Yes.
And
If
namaste
there are,
to all of you. Nice to see you. At least this is a wonder of modern science that we can see each other, and it is also a nice equipment for quarreling with each other.
okay. Yes, Maharaj. So I'll send you an email, Maharaj. So maybe next we'll schedule another session with you sometime soon. Hopefully.
Okay then.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shiva. Thank you, Priyanka.
Thank you. Thank you, Maharaji.
Okay. Okay then, puja. Okay, namaste. Now it is our puja time. I will go for evening prayer.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay, Jai Maha, Jai Swamiji.
Jai Maharaj.
Pranam, Swami.
Okay.